"Fire it! There's more of them than there are of us!" These were the last words of a black officer as he called an artillery strike on his own position. He single-handedly stopped a German offensive, but the army tried to erase his sacrifice for 52 years. John Robert Fox was born on May 18, 1915, in Cincinnati, Ohio, the eldest of 3 children. He grew up in nearby Wyoming, Ohio, navigating a segregated America where his potential was limited not by talent, but by the color of his skin. Like so many young black Americans of his generation, Fox learned early that he'd have to be twice as good to get half as far. He started at Ohio State University, but soon transferred to Wilberforce University, one of the few institutions where African American students could participate in the Reserve Officer Training course. At Wilberforce, Fox excelled. He studied engineering, demonstrating the analytical mind that would later save countless lives on an Italian mountainside. He also met a young woman named Arlene Marrow, and they married in 1942, shortly after his graduation. That same year, their daughter Sandra was born. Fox received his commission as a second lieutenant on June 13, 1940, and was assigned to the 366th Infantry Regiment at Fort Devens, Massachusetts. The 366th was unique in the segregated army. All black soldiers, nearly all black officers, commanded by a white colonel. These were men who wanted to prove something, not just to their country, but to a military establishment that doubted they could fight at all. By 1944, Fox had been assigned to the 92nd Infantry Division, known as the Buffalo Soldiers Division, a name inherited from the legendary African-American cavalry regiments of the 19th century. The 92nd was the only African-American infantry division to see combat in Europe during World War II. More than 12,000 black soldiers would fight in Italy under conditions that would have broken lesser men. They faced the Germans to their front and institutional racism at their backs. Their commanding general, Major General Edward Almond, a Virginia native, had decided before they even shipped overseas that black soldiers couldn't fight. When things went wrong, he blamed his troops. When they succeeded, he called it luck. Supply officers sometimes diverted equipment meant for the 92nd to white units. Medical staff refused blood transfusions for wounded black soldiers. And when the Buffalo Soldiers fought with extraordinary courage, their actions were often ignored or downplayed in official reports. But the men of the 92nd kept fighting. They advanced through the brutal terrain of Italy's northern Apennines, up narrow mountain passes where German artillery could drop shells with devastating accuracy. They pushed through the Gothic Line, a massive defensive network of bunkers, fortresses, and machine gun nests that the Germans had spent months building. And by December 1944, elements of the 92nd, including Fox's unit, held a critical sector in the Serchio River Valley near the medieval village of Sommocolonia. Sommocolonia sits 2,200 feet above sea level on a cliff edge, commanding a view of the entire Serchio Valley. For artillery observers, it was perfect. Fox could see for miles, calling down fire on German positions with precision. For defenders, it was a nightmare. Steep approaches, limited escape routes, and buildings that offered more exposure than protection. In late December, American intelligence began picking up signs of unusual German activity. Something was coming, but nobody knew exactly what or when. On December 23rd, Fox moved to Sommocolonia with his forward observer party, volunteering to take an extended 4-day Christmas posting. Most of the 2nd Battalion, 366th Infantry, remained in the area briefly before moving out for duties elsewhere, leaving behind just 2 platoons, approximately 70 American soldiers, alongside about 25 Italian partisans. Christmas Day, 1944, passed quietly. Fox and his men even distributed chocolates and cheese to grateful villagers. But that evening, something changed. German soldiers began infiltrating the town in civilian clothes, moving silently through the narrow streets, positioning themselves for what would come at dawn. By early morning on December 26th, Sommocolonia was largely in enemy hands, and Fox's men didn't know it yet. At 4 a.m. German artillery opened up. Then, at 4:50 a.m., elements of 2 German assault battalions, including elite troops from the Austrian 4th Mountain Battalion, launched Operation Wintergewitter, Winter Storm. This was the German 14th Army's last major offensive in Italy, designed to break through the Gothic line, recapture the strategic port of Livorno, and choke off Allied supplies. The Germans had chosen their target carefully. They were attacking the 92nd Infantry Division, which German and even American commanders considered one of the weakest units in Italy. The Germans expected the black soldiers to break and run. They were catastrophically wrong. Fox's observation post on the second floor of a building near the village center gave him a clear view of what was happening. By dawn, he could see Austrian and German troops swarming through the streets below, moving in overwhelming numbers toward American positions. Most U.S. forces began withdrawing under the intense artillery bombardment and the weight of the German assault. Retreat was the only sensible option when facing forces that outnumbered you 6 or 7 to 1. But Fox and a small group of observers volunteered to stay behind. Someone needed to direct defensive artillery fire to cover the withdrawal. Someone needed to slow the German advance long enough for American and Italian civilians to reach safety. Fox knew what staying meant. He stayed anyway. By 8 a.m. the battle had become brutal. German forces were in the streets, engaging in close-quarters combat with the remaining defenders. Fox radioed to the 598th Field Artillery Battalion, requesting fire on German positions. His commander, Lieutenant Colonel Robert Ross, acknowledged the request, and the guns spoke. Shells began falling on enemy concentrations, disrupting their advance, buying precious time. But the Germans kept coming. Fox adjusted fire, bringing it closer to his own position. The shells walked toward him, each adjustment more dangerous than the last. Colonel Ross radioed back, concerned. The fire Fox was requesting was getting too close to American positions. Fox acknowledged the concern and called for the fire to be brought in even closer. "That was just where I wanted it. Bring it 60 yards. The response from the artillery battalion commander was immediate and alarmed. That would put the barrage directly on top of friendly positions. The heavy guns were firing 105mm shells. At that range, there would be no safe zone. Fox understood. He made the adjustment anyway. The distance was cut in half. German forces continued pressing forward in overwhelming numbers, surrounding the building where Fox had positioned himself. They were closing in from all sides. There was no escape route left. Fox radioed again, requesting another fire mission. His voice was calm, professional, doing the mathematics of his own death. Colonel Ross protested one final time. "Fox, that will be on you." The last transmission anyone heard from First Lieutenant John R. Fox came through clearly on the radio. "Fire it! There's more of them than there are of us. Give them hell." The artillery barrage came down on Fox's position with devastating precision. The building shook apart under the impacts. Shells designed to destroy fortified positions tore through walls, floors, anything in their path. German soldiers caught in the barrage were killed instantly, dozens of them cut down as they closed in on the American position. Fox died in the impacts he had called down on himself, along with the 8 Italian partisans who had refused to leave him. When American forces retook Sommocolonia a week later, they found Fox's body in the ruins of his observation post, surrounded by approximately 100 dead German soldiers. The villagers who had survived told American officers what happened. Fox had held his position to the end, calling fire on himself to stop the German advance. His actions had delayed the offensive long enough for other American units to reorganize their defense and for Italian civilians to escape. The German attack, which had broken through American lines and captured several towns including Barga, ran out of momentum within 2 days. The Indian 8th Infantry Division rushed across the Apennines as reinforcements stabilized the line. By December 30th, American and British forces had recaptured all lost territory, including Sommocolonia. Operation Winter Gewitter had failed. The Gothic line held, and the port of Livorno remained in Allied hands. Fox's commanding officer, Major L. Harold Larson of the 598 Field Artillery Battalion, immediately wrote up the paperwork nominating Fox for the Medal of Honor, the nation's highest military decoration. Larson, a white officer, described Fox's actions as beyond anything he had seen in the war. The paperwork went up the chain of command and disappeared. John Fox's body was returned to the United States and buried in Colebrook Cemetery in Whitman, Massachusetts, near his wife's family home in Brockton. His widow, Arlene, never remarried. She raised their daughter, Sandra, alone, telling her about the father she barely remembered, about his courage and his conviction that black Americans were as good as anyone else and deserved to prove it. But there was no Medal of Honor, no national recognition. Fox's name appeared in no history books. For decades, his sacrifice was known only to his family, his former comrades, and the grateful villagers of Sommocolonia, who erected a small stone marker at the site where he died. What happened to Fox's Medal of Honor recommendation was not unique. It was systematic. Of the more than 1.2 million African Americans who served in the United States military during World War II, not a single one received the Medal of Honor. Not one. The military awarded 433 Medals of Honor for actions in World War II. 0 went to black servicemen, despite countless documented acts of extraordinary heroism. The message was clear. In the eyes of the military establishment, black soldiers' courage didn't count the same way. This wasn't an accident. It was policy, written into the architecture of a segregated military that viewed African American soldiers as inherently inferior. Awards and decorations went through chains of command, where white officers often refused to forward recommendations for black soldiers or downgraded them to lesser awards. Many recommendations were simply lost or destroyed. The climate of racism that pervaded the military made it nearly impossible for black soldiers to receive proper recognition, no matter what they had done. Major General Almond, who commanded the 92nd Division, was one of the worst offenders. When his black soldiers fought with distinction, he found reasons to discredit them. When they faced impossible odds and held their ground, he blamed them for not achieving more. His reports painted the Buffalo soldiers as unreliable, despite overwhelming evidence to the contrary. This institutional racism had deadly consequences beyond Fox's story. In Sommocolonia, when the battle was at its worst, American Fifth Army headquarters 6 miles away refused to send reinforcements or even blood transfusions for the wounded. The official reason was never stated, but the unofficial one was understood by everyone. The soldiers dying on that mountainside were black, and the system had decided their lives weren't worth the same resources that would have been committed to white troops without question. But the truth has a way of surfacing, even when powerful institutions try to bury it. In 1982, 38 years after Fox's death, the Army finally awarded him the Distinguished Service Cross, the nation's second highest military decoration. It was a start, but it wasn't justice. Then, in the early 1990s, the Department of Defense commissioned Shaw University in North Carolina to investigate whether African American soldiers had been unfairly denied the Medal of Honor in World War II. The researchers worked methodically, reviewing thousands of files, analyzing documentation of heroic acts, comparing them to similar actions by white soldiers who had received the Medal of Honor. They removed all references to race from the files, presenting only the facts of what soldiers had done under fire. The results were damning. The study concluded that racial discrimination had absolutely prevented black soldiers from receiving proper recognition. The report identified 10 African American servicemen whose actions clearly merited the Medal of Honor. 7 of those recommendations were approved by the Army. First Lieutenant John R. Fox was one of them. On January 13, 1997, more than 52 years after Fox called artillery fire on his own position, President Bill Clinton presented the Medal of Honor to Fox's widow, Arlene, in a ceremony at the White House. She was 77 years old. Fox was one of 7 African American World War II veterans to receive the Medal of Honor that day. 6 of the 7, including Fox, received their medals posthumously. Only one, First Lieutenant Vernon Baker, who had led an extraordinary assault on German positions in Italy in April 1945, survived to receive his medal in person. These 7 men remain the only African American recipients of the Medal of Honor for World War II service. Standing in the White House that day, accepting the medal her husband should have received 5 decades earlier, Arlene Fox spoke with quiet dignity. "We never needed any medals," she said. "John just felt that we were as good as anybody else, and he was going to prove it, and he did." The people of Sommocolonia never forgot. While the United States military ignored Fox's sacrifice for half a century, the Italian villagers honored him continuously. They maintained his memorial marker. They told their children and grandchildren what the black American soldier had done for them. On July 16, 2000, Sommocolonia dedicated a peace park in memory of Fox and his unit. Arlene Fox traveled to Italy for the ceremony, accompanied by her daughter Sandra, now grown, and her grandchildren. Former soldiers from the 92nd Division, now elderly men, made the journey back to the mountain village where so many of their friends had died. When they reached the tower where Fox had made his last stand, several broke down, overcome by memories 56 years old. "I see him in the tower," one veteran sobbed. "I see John." The German and Austrian soldiers who attacked Sommocolonia that December morning expected an easy victory. They had been told the Black American Division was weak, poorly trained, poorly led. What they found instead were soldiers who fought with extraordinary courage under impossible circumstances. Of the 95 American and Italian partisan defenders of Sommocolonia, only 18 made it alive to American lines. But they held long enough. They delayed the German offensive long enough. They proved that courage has nothing to do with skin color and everything to do with what you're willing to sacrifice for others. First Lieutenant John R. Fox was 29 years old when he died. He left behind a wife, a 2-year-old daughter who would grow up with only photographs and stories of her father, and a nation that wouldn't properly honor his sacrifice for half a century. But he also left an example of courage that transcended the racism that tried to diminish it. Fox knew he was fighting for a country that didn't treat him as an equal. He knew the army didn't value black soldiers the way it valued white ones. He knew that even if he survived the war, he'd return to segregated water fountains, separate schools, and laws designed to keep him in his place. He knew all of this, and he fought anyway. He sacrificed anyway. Because sometimes the measure of a person isn't what they're given, but what they give when everything is taken from them. John Fox proved something profound on that Italian mountainside. He proved that honor isn't bestowed by institutions or medals or official recognition. Honor is what you do when no one important is watching, when there's no reward coming, when the only witness is your own conscience. Fox's actions that morning saved lives, American and Italian both. His sacrifice helped stop a German offensive that could have changed the course of the Italian campaign. And his example stands as an enduring rebuke to the racism that tried to erase him. The Medal of Honor citation that finally came in 1997 uses the formal language of military valor, extraordinary heroism, conspicuous gallantry, above and beyond the call of duty. But the Italian villagers who survived that Christmas battle found simpler words. They called him a hero. They called him a savior. They called him the American who gave everything for people he'd never met, in a village whose name he probably couldn't pronounce, on a frozen mountainside 6,000 miles from home. And they made sure that even when his own country forgot, Sommocolonia would remember. Today, Fox's story reminds us that the fight for recognition was often as difficult as the fight against the enemy. That African-American soldiers in World War II truly were fighting on two fronts, as they faced not only German and Japanese forces, but also the entrenched racism of their own military. And that true courage sometimes means making the ultimate sacrifice not for glory or recognition, but simply because it's the right thing to do. Fox's final words still echo across the decades. Fire it! There's more of them than there are of us. Give them hell! In those words you can hear everything. The calm acceptance of death, the determination to make it count, the refusal to let the enemy pass, no matter the cost. When the artillery shells fell on that observation post, they killed a husband, a father, a son, a promising young engineer who might have built bridges or designed buildings, or taught mathematics to the next generation. But they couldn't kill what he represented. The courage of men who demanded to be recognized as equals, who proved their worth on battlefields where their country finally had no choice but to acknowledge it. John R. Fox earned his Medal of Honor 52 years late, but he earned it the moment he made that final radio call. And his story stands as a testament to the thousands of African-American soldiers whose heroism went unrecognized, whose sacrifices were minimized, whose contributions were erased from the official narrative. Some of those soldiers, like Fox, eventually received the recognition they deserved. Many others never did. But all of them, every single one, proved that the content of your character matters more than the color of your skin. They proved it in the only laboratory that truly tests such things. Under fire, when everything is on the line, when the only choice is between courage and cowardice. Fox chose courage, and in doing so, he left us a legacy worth remembering.